Hello, and welcome to Living Right with Chris. My name is Chris Eswekin, and I am glad to welcome you to this week's episode of our weekly series. So for this week, I will be speaking to a topic that says the invincible wound, understanding trauma you can't see. So not all wounds bleed. Some wounds live deep down in our minds and they affect our everyday life. These wounds are called trauma. So trauma is actually events that occur, especially in our childhood, or events that ought to have occurred that didn't occur in our childhood, leaving an imprint deep in our minds that affects us in our adulthood. Such trauma are usually not just big events. They can actually come in form of harsh words from our parents or um, elders around us. It could come as rejection. It could come as failure. It could come as a loss, maybe the loss of a loved one, and it comes mainly as childhood experiences. The truth is, trauma doesn't always leave your memory, but it shapes your behavior. The way most adults behave today is largely dependent on the childhood experiences they had growing up. So, all of the experiences put together as a child shape the way he or she behaves as an adult. And this is not far fetched. Look at society today. You know, um, People get so triggered to be angry, not because most of the time of the current, you know, situation or current happening, but because they're reacting from a place of trauma, from an event that occurred before that precedes the current event. So you see people react so harshly to a very simple matter, and you wonder, are you sure this reaction is because of this current, matter? No, the truth is that they're reacting from a place of trauma, and that trauma, when it is triggered, will show forth, you know, a reaction, not from the current happening, but from um, past events, right? So you may notice people overreacting to small things, like I've mentioned, trust issues. These are trauma that has affected people. Inability to trust someone is trauma, right? Fear of getting close to people is trauma. Avoiding opportunity is trauma. you know, Inability to love most times comes from the place of trauma. That's trauma speaking. Trauma says, don't go there again. You might get hurt. Why? Because perhaps that person has trusted someone before and had been hurt by that person. And that leaves an imprint in the person's mind and then begins to affect the person's mindset. And that person now, react to people currently based on the past negative events. That is what trauma is about. But I'm reminded of the scripture in Psalm 147, verse 3, that says, and that promises us healing for the brokenhearted. That God heals the brokenhearted. God doesn't, God doesn't ignore pain. He restores peace. He restores um, wholeness, you know, to a pained heart. And I want you to know that what you don't heal from, you will react from. And that is why many people today in our society react from the place of trauma, from the place of their pain. And it is not a good place to react from. And that is why we are where we are in society today. So I want you to pause and reflect. What past experiences still affect you or affect your actions today? I want you to take deeply, you know, have a time of, self-reflection and ask yourself that question. That what actually, you know, is affecting my decisions today that are not based on current happenings, you know, especially in the negative light. The fact is that healing begins with honesty. You must be honest with yourself to know what you are reacting from, or where you are reacting from. You must be honest to know what triggers you and why is that trigger there. Until you know that, until you are being honest, with yourself, healing will not happen. And the only way to heal from trauma is to be honest with yourself that there is trauma, because most people are living in self-denial, and that is why this thing keeps reoccurring in their life. So I want you to, take this week to be honest with yourself, to know those things that ought to be, especially in your childhood. Think back, go back to your childhood and begin to deal with all of the issues that happened negatively, and heal from them. If you need to speak to a professional, please do speak to a professional, that can help you walk you through the events of your life as a child. And that is where healing starts from. I want to thank you um, for being here this week. This is the second week in the month of April. If you're new here, please um, hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. Also, invite your family and friends to come and learn from this hub of wisdom. It's been a pleasure hosting you here, and I want to say thank you for always being here. For me, it is bye. I hope to see you next week. Bye for now.